so severe. You know, my personal prediction is, and this you can take with a grain of salt, I think we're going to have 1979 but worse. 79, interest rates went to 20%, inflation went to 20%. I think we could have that or 30%. Or some say the currency could fail. You know, we've exported our inflation for 40 years. We've bought more products than we have sold. So when you buy imports, your dollars go overseas and they tend to stay there. Bernanke said the other day, over 50% of the currency is overseas right now. What if that currency decides to come home? If the currency comes home, you might have massive inflation and liquidation. Now people say, well, during the crisis, the dollar got stronger. Well, it did. The dollar was the strongest of the week. They're all paper currencies now, and it was the strongest of the week. But so was gold. Gold went up dramatically too. You know, it's gone where it was averaging $300 to now 8 to 9 to 100 to 1,000. But there may be some calamity that comes out of this, and I think we need to be prepared and hopefully have some new people to step in.
With that, you think they ought to put in term limits?
Yeah, I think term limits would be good. That was another thing I was disappointed on Lewis. He took a voluntary term limits of 3 terms. Then he discovered he was more important and he decided to stay up there longer. That's what happens. The volunteer ones don't work because let's say I got elected and I really said I do the volunteer ones and you liked me, then I go home and the guys you don't like stay. So term limits are good, but I think they'd have to come through the state legislature. Congress will never vote them on themselves. They always have some votes and they never get anywhere with the votes because they'd be voting to send themselves home. But if you did it the way you do a normal constitutional amendment and do it through the state legislatures, even that's hard. You might get something through like that if people got really involved, because state legislators all want to be in Congress too. So if they limited the other congressmen, they might have a self-interest in actually voting for term limits. You know,
his first term, I get a letter from him that he sent to all his constituents talking about the stuff he's bringing back to our district, and I wrote to him that, you know, I didn't vote for you to be bringing money back here. I voted you to go there and stop money from having to go there. And to me, what all this is about with regards to term limits, and of course, as you know, the Contract with America had it in 1994, and is that most of the spending is in light of how will this help me get reelected.
Right.
And so it seems to me that term limits, to me, is the key thing, all right, in terms of not having these people have the ability to spend everybody else's money to help themselves get reelected. And then you turn around and have McCain-Feingold where then you clamp down everybody's free speech. I mean, that's the ultimate, I mean, when you look at it.
Right, and it's very hard to beat an incumbent too, because I think incumbency rate's 96%. 96% of incumbents win re-election. In fact, the joke used to be that we had a higher rate of incumbency than the Soviet Politburo. And that's too bad. I mean, it's a system that's not working really well. It's also a system where normally you have to be very famous or very wealthy to win, you know, an office, or have been slogging along for years and years and doing nothing else but run for office and not had any other career.
Well, how can the Republican Party cut its how in your opinion do you think the Republican Party can basically cut the pork?
Yeah, well, I think you'd have to have people that admit that it's not just domestic spending, it's also military, it's across the whole board that you'd have to have some cuts. I kind of think if you were running for president, you'd have to have something simple that could be spread as a message, either a freeze on spending. You know, it doesn't take too long for a freeze on spending to actually balance the budget, you know, or a 1% reduction, or passing something simple like, let's say we'll pass 2005's budget or something from a recent past. But boy, they squawk to high heaven and they play games with it. Look at your own government here. Right now, Brashear has said we're $456 million short. We have to realize that's a game. If you look at last year's budget and you look at this year's budget, receipts are 2% ahead of last year. But they're 2% short of the 4% they wanted to get. So we're 2% short of proposed budget, but everybody calls it a shortfall. Even the Republicans went along with it. We raised the cigarette and alcohol tax because they said we had a shortfall. So it's all about how people play games with the numbers. The other thing going back that disappointed me with Republicans, Ernie Fletcher went into office. I went to a small fundraiser here in town, actually gave him money, and I kind of regret it. And not because of the hiring scandal, because I don't think that was all trumped up by the Democrats. But it's very clear in our Constitution, both federal and state, that legislation for the budget has to be passed by the legislature, signed by the governor. It's ironclad to me. I think there's no question about it. Well, when Patton was in office, they couldn't get a budget, so Patton went ahead and spent the money. So when I saw Ernie Fletcher at this fundraiser, I said, Ernie, why don't you make it a campaign issue? If you get in, why don't you say that you won't spend the money? You'll force the legislature to pass it. And all you do is just make them sit there. They'll pass it within 2 days because nobody's getting any checks. The teachers wouldn't get checks. No one would be paid. Universities would shut down. Maybe pass a budget and they would have done it. But no, what did Ernie Fletcher do? The same thing Ron Lewis did. He went all around the state with big checks. Big checks. I mean, big facsimiles of checks with his name on them. Ernie Fletcher on the check. And he'd come and give Western $20 million or something. Everybody at Western would clap. But it was money that was in a budget that should have been appropriated by the legislature. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not from the governor. But he made the mistake of doing that, and then our courts ruled on it and actually said, you can spend what's essential, you just can't spend what's non-essential. But that's not what our Constitution says. Our Constitution says you don't spend anything unless the legislature passes it.
I'd like to ask one last question,
Sure.
and we'll let you go for the night. The day after the election in November of '08, we already started hearing about November of 2010. And I was wondering what the possibilities of seeing your name on a ballot before long would be.
If my wife has anything to say about it, zero. No, I've been trying to convince her. She's the first voter I've got to convince. I'm excited about it. I enjoy traveling. I probably went to 10 states, gave a lot of speeches, and had a lot of fun doing it. And I have something I want to say. I wasn't planning on doing anything, and then I got that whole scandal came up with McConnell getting David Williams up there to run against Bunning, and people were rumoring that Bunning wouldn't run. I said, well, what the heck? Why not? I'll throw my name in there and see what happens. And so I kind of had been thinking about running for something, but hadn't specifically thought about that race until this controversy came up. So I am interested in it, and if I can convince my wife, and if Senator Bunning doesn't run, I'm going to run for a seat. Those are two big ifs, and I think that Bunning, by all apparent, you know, what he's saying, he's going to run. But there's still some people on the Republican Executive Committee told me last week, well, he thinks it's 50-50 still. If he doesn't raise the money, he won't run. So we'll see what happens, and I want to do something, but I'm not sure what venue it will take. But thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Paul, we appreciate you coming out tonight, and on behalf of College Republicans, we got you your very own WKU mug, and if you don't have one already, a WKU towel.